don't get many universal truths in life, but here it is. If you have a business, as soon as you hire your first employee, let's say you work out of your house and you do something. As soon as you hire your first employee, there are 4 things every business must do. First of all, you have to manage and evaluate performance, because now you have somebody who works for you, right? So you have to somehow tell them what they have to do on a daily basis and then come up with a way to figure out if they're doing it right. Secondly, you have to pay them, of course, because people don't work for free, even if they're your family. Thirdly, you have to find a way to hire those people. You have to figure out, who are we going to hire in this business? On what basis will we hire them? And if we're going to promote them, if we're going to prepare them to take on more responsibility in our business, we have to figure out a way to make that selection as well. And then finally, of course, we have to train them to do whatever it is we need them to do to make our business run. All right? That's a universal truth. 4 things every business must do. I don't care if you're Auto Club South, I don't care if you're Xerox, if you're IBM, if you're a little grocery store, you must do those 4 things. For example, Joe's Grocery Store. Nice little place in South Philadelphia where I grew up. Even Joe's Grocery has to do those 4 things. When I was a kid growing up in Philadelphia, I worked at Joe's Grocery every summer. And I learned firsthand how Joe applied these 4 truths. Now, first of all, I should tell you a bit about Joe's. Joe's was the best grocery store in South Philadelphia, maybe in the entire city. He had the best produce, he had the best meats, he had great prices, he had extremely loyal customers. He'd been there for 50 years, and his father had been there for probably 50 years prior to him. And he had come up, Joe did, with a particular way of doing these 4 things. For example, when it came to managing and evaluating performance, it was very simple. It was the Joe way or no way. All right? Joe's the one who told you what to do, and Joe's evaluation was law. If he said you were doing a good job, you were doing a good job. If you weren't, you weren't. It was very, very simple. As a matter of fact, the only real test of how well you were doing on a given day was if Joe would look at you or not. If you looked up and smiled, actually, if he looked up, that was a good day. If he smiled at you, then you probably were going to get a big promotion and a raise. Ordinarily, he would grunt. In terms of pay, Joe took a very unique approach. He did it based on need. For example, there was Vinny the bag boy. He'd say, well, Vinny lives at home with his mother. What does he need money for? So he'd pay Vinny what Vinny needed to live. And that was it. Now, Angela, on the other hand, she was a single mother who worked behind the counter, so she got paid about 4 times what Vinny did because she needed the money. That makes sense. Now, when it came to hiring and promoting employees, Joe had a unique philosophy there, too. First of all, it helped if you were Italian. It was very beneficial if you were Catholic and went to Joe's church. It helped if you knew your parents, okay? And that's the way he hired people. And as far as promotion was concerned, you had to have the same last name as Joe, which was really the only qualification there was. And when it came to training, it was a lot of pointing. A lot of pointing. I showed you once, you do it, that's all. And if I change my mind tomorrow about how it's done, I'll point and show you one more time, and that's it, and that's all. Okay, very, very simple. Now this may all sound kind of Neanderthal to you. Maybe you're thinking, how could a business run this way? But it ran very successfully. Like I said, Joe had loyal customers. He had customers going around the block. There were people that would drive many miles. Once they left the old neighborhood and moved to the suburbs, they'd still drive miles to come back and shop there. So these things worked for Joe. They worked. They made his business what it was, and it was extremely successful. Now, when I worked there as a kid, Joe Jr., who was a friend of mine, worked there too. And of course, his father trained him. And of course, someday the idea was that Joe Jr. was going to take over the business. Except Joe Jr. had a different vision. He thought, well, maybe we should expand. Maybe we should have more than one store. Maybe we should have stores in the suburbs. Maybe we should become a regional chain. Maybe we should take on the big stores. But he wasn't sure if his father's way of doing business was going to work. And the fact is, it wouldn't work. For a very simple reason. Once Joe is gone, his way of doing business goes with him. Because the people that work for Joe are really just robots, aren't they? They don't use any of their own thoughts. They don't own their jobs at all, as a matter of fact. What they do is determined completely by one person. Their pay is at the whim of one particular individual. They are working in an autocratic, rule-bound environment, and chances are, left to their own devices, if Joe left and didn't come back, they wouldn't know what to do. So in that kind of an environment, it's not very likely that Joe Jr. is going to be able to take this business anywhere. Why? Because the corporate culture that Joe's grocery store has is not conducive to growth. The corporate culture that Joe's grocery store has really began as a solution to a set of problems. You can almost look at these four things, these four cornerstones of any corporate culture, as problems that have to be solved. Again, you have to manage and evaluate the performance of your employees, you have to pay them, you have to hire and promote them, and you have to train them. All right? Four problems you must solve. All right? Joe's solutions to those problems became his corporate culture. And as so often happens, sometimes the solutions to one set of problems becomes a problem in the future. And that's what's happening at Joe's grocery store. Okay? His corporate culture is not working. It's not going to get him where he needs to go. Cultures have to change. If they don't change, companies don't grow. Obviously, our corporate culture has these cornerstones as well. Now, there's a lot more to any corporate culture than just the cornerstones, but at the end of the day, it's built on those things. Because the way we do those four things says an awful lot about the people that are here. It says an awful lot about how they're compensated, about how well they understand their job, and at the end of the day, about how much they own their job. And our corporate culture is called the ACS way.